Hello, this is Hugh Ross, and I'm the president and founder of Reasons to Believe. I'm an astrophysicist, also serve as a pastor in a church between Caltech and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And like many of you, I've been under government lockdown, forced to stay in my home. You say, what's that like? Well, I'm going to have to give an acknowledgement to this COVID-19 in my next book because of all the time I've had to work on that. But it's been interrupted with a lot of other writing projects. I've been probably doing more intense writing than I've ever done in the past 5 years. Chapter contributions, articles, things on the on our reasons.org blogs. But I'm really trying to make progress on my next book on interior designs. Incidentally, if any of you want to get a free chapter of any of my books, you can do that by going to reasons.org/Ross. And incidentally, that works for other scholars. If you want a free chapter of any Fuzz's book, it's reasons.org/Rana. But for me, reasons.org/Ross. And in the next few minutes, we're going to be talking about climate change. I've just come out with a book on climate change. And to help us with this, we're going to have a moderated discussion, and it's going to be led by Anastasia Young. She's here with me, and she's going to try to get her discussion going. But the real treat is for you to ask your questions. And so we'll be transitioning to the questions that you have. But Sia, why don't you get things going for us?
Hey, Hugh, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to today's conversation. And as questions are coming in from our viewers, I have a few of my own. I know you just had a book come out, Weather and Climate Change. And so you've done a lot of research on climate change. And I have my own questions. So we'll see also what your audience has to say. But um, I guess I'll start at the beginning for me of that most of us, the first time we really started hearing about climate change was from Al Gore's movie in 2006. It was an inconvenient truth. And is that in 2006, is that kind of when this all really started, the conversation on climate change?
Well, that's what I address in chapter one of this book, Weathering Climate Change, making the point that this has been an ongoing dialogue and discussion, debate amongst scientists for about 100 years. But it became politically charged in the 1980s, especially in the late 1980s. And so this has been around a lot longer than people think, especially in the more developed nations of the world. This has been a major issue. But you are right that when Al Gore brought out his book, An Inconvenient Truth, that made it, everybody was now aware of this debate, and now it became kind of the number one talking point, and increasingly so as we've gone into the latter, just the past few years.
So okay, you just blew me away with 100 years. I'm thinking, 20 years that this has been a conversation, but uh, 100 years? Who's been having this conversation and where? Why did we just
Oh,
hear about it?
research scientists. I mean, if you look at the scientific literature, you see this has been an ongoing dialogue for a good 100 years. It caught the public attention in the mid 1980s and became a political football around about 1988 and 1989. And survey groups like Pew and Barna have been surveying both Americans and internationals on this climate change issue ever since 1989. But yeah, people like Al Gore really brought it out to where even people in Hollywood were hearing about it. And once they hear about it, everybody hears about it.
Isn't that the truth? Yes, exactly. Um, so I let's start where we currently are and then kind of back up. Um, you said this has been a conversation for about 100 years. Um, Everything that heard, it sounds so imminent and sounds terrifying. That what's happening right now with the climate and all of the scary things that we're
Well,
hearing.
I'm glad I waited a bit to bring this book out because it's only in the last 18 months that the scientific community has really been able to develop a reliable, accurate temperature record of what's been happening over the past 10,000 years. And what that new record reveals is that our climate has been about 4 times more stable than we thought, say, 2 or 3 years ago. So we've been enjoying a period of extreme climate stability. And that's one of the main features of the book I wrote, is to alert people to the fact that what we've been experiencing for 9,500 years is an extreme exception. The norm for planet Earth is climate instability. What we've had for 9,500 years is a global mean temperature that's not changed by more than plus or minus 0.65 degrees. Now, to get a little more detail, the temperature hit a peak 8,700 years ago, and it's been steadily declining by about 1 degree centigrade over those 8,700 years. But what has happened in the past 70 years, just 70 years, is that 1 degree temperature decline has been completely reversed. We're now back to where we were 8,700 years ago. And the concern is if we stay on the current warming trend of the past 70 years, that it could go up another degree centigrade in just another 70 years. And that raises the possibility that we could melt the polar ice cap and quickly find ourselves in the next ice age. Because that's something you see in the ice age cycle. Global warming always brings on global cooling. And for the first time, the scientific community has an understanding why that happens.
Okay, so this was a conversation I was having with someone just the other day. So, what is happening right now? You said that there is global warming that's going to bring on global cooling, and this is tied to a lot of concerns about um, famine, and I don't necessarily understand all of the potential impact of this. Can you kind of unpack that
Well,
for us?
I make the point in the book that in order for billions of humans to live on the earth and have high technology civilization, we must be living in an ice age cycle where the planet cycles between 10% ice coverage and 20 to 23% ice coverage. But if you look at the past 2 million years of the ice age cycle, it's been characterized by extreme climate instability, where the global mean temperature jumps up and down by 15 degrees centigrade over just a few centuries, which explains why humans living during the past ice age were not able to launch global civilization. The climate simply was too unstable to permit them to scale up agricultural activity where they could actually set free a significant percentage of the human population to do music, art, technology, engineering, and science. Everybody was employed just trying to come up with enough food. But climate stability changed all that.
Can you unpack that a little bit? Because you said that mentioned something about unprecedented climate stability, and so here we are right now, kind of worrying about the changing climate. But it sounds like what you're saying is that the climate has had a lot of changes in the Earth's history, and that the length of time that we've had without all of those changes is unique. I Am I understanding you
Yeah,
correctly?
you are. I mean, what's unique is that we've had 9,500 years of extreme climate stability, where the global mean temperature has been optimal for the development of human civilization. This is unique to the Earth's history. And so we need to realize that this period of climate stability is the exception, it's not the norm. And especially if you want to have billions of humans on the face of the earth, you have to be living in an ice age cycle. The ice age cycle basically makes sure you got enough water and enough fertilizer to feed billions of people. And what's special is we're living in an ice age cycle that normally drives extreme climate instability, but for a number of reasons, many different reasons, we've had this brief episode of extreme climate stability. And I would agree that we're in danger of upsetting that stability. But most of my book is devoted to the fact there are things we can do to sustain the climate stability for a little more than a millennium, if we so choose, and in a way that we can enhance the world economy rather than cripple the world economy. I mean, one of my motivations was to take the politics out of the debate, because you got one side saying we have to stabilize the climate, and to do that, we need to make draconian economic sacrifices. I'm saying, based on biblical principles, there's a way we can stabilize the climate where we boost the world economy rather than cripple it. And in that sense, I think we can take the politics out of the debate. Who's going to vote against a win-win?
Right. Well, and that is a perfect segue to something I've seen a lot, especially in social media, about you see these images of that right now during the COVID-19 pandemic, everybody's holed up in their houses. There's fewer people on the roads. And there's images from across the globe of people claiming the earth is healing itself now that you're removing all of the human contribution to this. What are your thoughts? Because you said you propose ideas that aren't draconian, that wouldn't cripple the economy. Uh, the earth looks like it's healing, but we can't sustain this. So can you speak into that?
Well, it's a bit of an exaggeration to say that this virus and the shutdown where people are constrained to their homes is healing the planet. It is to a small degree, but only to a small degree. Even if we were to sustain what we're doing right now with the global economy, it would not stop the global warming. It would blunt it. It would cause it to go up a little more slowly than it is. But you're right. I mean, the situation the world is in right now is not economically sustainable. So we need to find a way back to restoring our economy once this viral pandemic is over, but where we put into place economic pathways that enhance the global mean economy while at the same time stabilizing the climate. I mean, I got two whole chapters on proposals and how we can make that happen to the benefit of everybody. And it's based on the biblical principle that God has commanded us human beings to manage the resources of planet Earth for our benefit and the benefit of the rest of Earth's life, which implies that we will not be forced to make a choice between our benefit and the benefit of the rest of the planet's life. We will find win-win solutions if we're willing to search diligently enough for them.
Is this going to require the cooperation of all of us on the planet to work together? And let me just kind of unpack that a bit, Hugh. Um, One of the things that I've noticed, whether it be about climate change or the pandemic, um, it's really made us look at the planet as we are, as a people, not their country, my country. We're a people and we all impact each other. That's a good thing, I think, as a Christian, to have that perspective and understanding that all of us are created in God's image. Um, so how much cooperation across the globe are some of your plans or proposals going to require?
Well, I'm glad you raised that issue, Sia, because cooperation has been the biggest barrier to trying to stabilize climate change along the lines of what you see in Al Gore's books and other scientific writings, because they're really demanding that people make significant sacrifices. Let's all cooperate and all sacrifice together. It's much easier to motivate people. And again, this is a biblical principle. We human beings are fundamentally selfish. We look out for our own interests and not the interests of others, in spite of biblical commands to do the reverse. And so it's easier to motivate people if they got an economic incentive. I mean, one example I put in the book is that we have a problem with people in the Amazonian jungles burning down the forest and trying to convert it into pasture lands, thinking, well, I can raise cattle there and make money, not realizing that if they sustain that, the soil in the Amazon is not able to maintain that long term. We're in danger of turning the Amazon region into a desert because the soil is really quite poor. Rather, we need to go to those people and say, here's a way you can make more money. Instead of trying to, slash and burn and convert it to pasture land and raise cattle, why don't we actually try to make money on responsible lumbering? And what we now know, for example, is that the old strategy, we have to preserve the Amazon at all costs and that let nobody tamper with it, is actually a bad strategy because the old trees tend to die. And when they die, they release carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And old trees don't grow fast. So they're not very efficient at pulling greenhouse gases of the atmosphere. We'd be better off at going through the Amazon jungle and lumbering the trees before they get to the point of disease and decay and sell that lumber. And that way it would be preserved in people's homes and furniture. And then replant the area so that you got fast growing trees. And if you got fast growing trees, that's going to pull greenhouse gases of the atmosphere. And each different tree species has a period within its growth cycle where it's most efficient in pulling greenhouse gases of the atmosphere. And so you need to manage the forest and all of its species in such a way that you maximize the drawdown of greenhouse gases. And what's interesting, if you do that, you make the most money out of your lumbering industries. So there's actually a way to make the Amazonian people more prosperous economically, while at the same time, you're actually making the Amazon a region that's even more efficient at pulling greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. So that's just one example out of many of things we can do that really are a win-win solution.
Um, in in my previous conversation with AJ, there was a conversation about our stewardship. And I kind of want to ask you a two-part question, Hugh, because really looking at the biblical part of this, of um, what God has given us, and in the garden that He gave us the directive to take care of this planet, to tend to it, to be stewards, to be wise with it and careful, because it is God's creation, though He's allowed us to care for it. And some of the mismanagement and the trouble it's caused on the whole planet. So that's one side. That's kind of the negative side of it. I'd like you to speak into that. But on the positive side, everything that you have talked about so far really tends to point to, as you like to put it, fine tuning or design, like an intentional God with an intentional design, and how He created things and created a balance of things. And you were talking about the Amazon forest and the impact of that on the planet. And can you just kind of unpack both of those, our responsibility as stewards, and also just really seeing God's intimate hand and design and how He's created the system on the planet?
Well, a lot of what you're going to see in weathering climate change is looking at the history of the Earth and just seeing how step by step we have our Creator intervening and fine tuning and designing to open up this incredible period of extreme climate stability. So this has been a long process in the history of the Earth. And I think I did that to really make the point we need to see this as a special gift from God. Look at all that He's done to make this possible. And look at the timing. I mean, we have this period of extreme climate stability at the same time when the sun has got minimal flaring activity. At the same time, our galaxy has an unusually very infrequent period of supernova eruptions. All these little windows are lining up. I mean, what amazes me is when you actually look at all the evidence, and I think that's the benefit of having an interdisciplinary approach here. When you do an interdisciplinary approach, you say, wow, there's not just this window of extreme climate stability, there's about 30 windows of things that are exceptional. And they all could happen at different times, but the amazing thing is they all happen simultaneously. And so when you see all these narrow time windows that are necessary for us humans to have global human civilization with a large population, you realize this is no accident. To have all these narrow time windows coincidentally line up at the same time tells us there's purpose in all of this. And really, what I'm trying to do is make people ask the question, why? Why has our Creator set everything up like this? What does God want from us in response? What is the reason why we humans exist on this planet with billions of us at this time? What is our role in all of this? And people commented on this politically, but I want them to look at it from a much bigger perspective.
Oh, that is good, and that's a good question for all of us, whether we are people of faith or not sure where we stand on it. That the big why, Wh- why did all of those windows line up exactly the way they should, and why is our planet so perfectly designed, and how is it that why is it that we as humans can have such an impact for the good or bad, and so you unpack that more in your book, you said.
Well, I do, and also make the point that not only should we be preparing for the fact that this period of extreme climate stability inevitably will come to an end, we can extend it, but not extend it forever. Likewise, we need to be preparing for other things that we see in the other time windows. For example, we've had this period of 100 years with no big solar flare. But we know from the event in 1859, these things happen. And there's relatively economic ways to prepare for those. But if we don't prepare, then we're going to suffer the consequences. Again, there's the biblical principle: build your house on a rock, not on the sand. But we see multiple ways where we here in the 21st century have our houses on sand. And in one sense, there's a wake up call, not just a wake up call to, hey, the temperature's going up. There's a wake up call to all kinds of things. And that's one reason why I talked about these multiple time windows, is to make the point there's more going on than just the climate change that could be threatening us. And that we need to take an integrated look at how we can extend this period of billions of us existing and thriving at the rate we do, and ultimately fulfilling the purpose for why God put us here.
I'm just going to ask you two more of my own questions. I have our team here behind the scenes telling me that a lot of people have questions, so I won't take up all your time. I'll share you. But in light of what you said, Hugh, whether it's climate change or whatever happens next or whatever has happened in the past, as a Christian, um, how should we view things like that we hear that are scary like this about the Amazon fires or the climate change or the coronavirus? All of these things, they can tend to make us afraid. But as a Christian, what is your advice on how we should look at these things?
Well, as a Christian, I say, where did we go astray from what the Bible taught us? I mean, this coronavirus, I think, is a perfect example. Quarantining was taught in the Bible at the time of Moses. And so, we've been a little more circumspect about that. We could have had less consequences. In fact, what fascinated me is it combines quarantining with washing. And it's like, okay, now we know that's what we should be doing. Also talks about how we need to quickly bury our feces. And so I'm saying, hey, we need to be closing our toilet lids. So the Bible actually talks about all this stuff. And so if we just, and likewise, to realize what we're experiencing right now is a gift. God put us here as stewards. We're to go to Him when we need wisdom about how we can manage this planet. And so, yeah, we're caught in a spot where we say, wow, we goofed. Let's go back to God's word and see what we did and get ready. Because, I mean, viruses are here. They are part of God's very good creation. We wouldn't be here without viruses. So they're a blessing, but we humans can also make them a curse. And I think that's significant too, is that just like with this climate instability we're facing, is it God's fault? No, it's our fault. This pandemic, as bad as it is it God's fault? No, we actually made it worse by our mismanagement. So it's things we can do to correct, but also to prepare for the future and realize, okay, this is a special time and we need to be wise. God's given us the counsel. He's told us we can manage the planet for our benefit and the benefit of all life, but we're going to need His wisdom. And hopefully, this will cause people to go back to Him and say, okay, we need to find your solution rather than claiming there is no solution, or the only solution is something that's going to require draconian sacrifices. No, that's not in line with what God's word has taught for thousands of years.
Um, my last question, and then we'll get to everybody else, is that tells me as a Christian how I should look at this. Look at the scriptures, be willing to repent, be willing to go back to what God designed in the first place. And that is good for me. Now, when I'm talking to someone else about climate change, someone that they're not necessarily a person of faith, and I had a conversation with a gentleman on the plane that he was not a man of faith. He was a nice man, and he was terrified for his 2-year-old son. I asked him, he loves his son. I asked him if he was going to have more kids, and he's like, absolutely not,
Hmm.
because he doesn't know what he says. He just blurted out, climate change is a real thing, and I don't know what's going to happen. And so, as a Christian, how do I engage others on this conversation?
Well, I think you said it well. Don't panic. Okay, God's in control. Climate change is real. I give the evidence for why it's real in the book, but make the point that there's no need to panic. There's things that we can do. Now, we need to do them right away. I mean, delay is not an option. And God has promised that there are solutions to the environmental situations we're facing that will be to our benefit and the benefit of all life. And if we don't have the answers, we need to dig for those answers. And I don't claim to have all the answers in my book. I just give some answers I'm aware of. I think there are many more answers. And it's like, let's at least start pursuing the win-win solutions rather than, okay, I'm caught between a rock and a hard place, and I'm going to choose the rock or I'm going to choose the hard place. Um, God loves us more than that.
I look forward to digging into your book and finding out some of those win-win proposals. You've teased it quite well, Hugh.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and jump into some of our questions here. Again, like I said, the team is just saying that they are coming in fast and furious. So we have a question from Tim Boyle. And he says, I have a question concerning the change in the ice age cycle from 41,000 to about 10,000 years, which you said was precipitated by the asteroid strike in Southeast Asia. I want to ask about the mechanism.
Okay, yeah, he's referring to the fact that before 800,000 years ago, the ice age cycle was 41,000 years, and that meant you had very brief interglacial periods, only 2, 3, 4,000 years long, not enough time to launch and sustain civilization, and that was driven by the regular change in the tilt of Earth's rotation axis, and that is still going on today. But what happened 800,000 years ago, there is a transition from a very regular 41,000 year ice age cycle to a cycle that was approximately 100,000 years. And the fact that it's approximate suggests that there's many causes for that transition. And you'll actually see an appendix in Weathering Climate Change where I talk about 14 different factors that have been suggested to explain how you had this transition from 41,000 years to 100,000 years. And what Tim is referring to, the asteroid strike, that's part of it, but it's only part of it. There's been quite a big debate in the scientific literature. Which of these 14 possible causes for the transition, are the real cause? And I argue in my book, you cannot finger a single one of the 14 as the one and only cause of the transition. In fact, it's quite possible you need all 14 in order to explain the transition. But a big feature in all of this is that these causal agents, including asteroid strikes, and looks like there might be two that hit, or two comet strikes, what they did is brought down the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere, and that this had a major effect in transitioning us from 41,000 years to 100,000 years. But yeah, I give a brief list in the book, but if you want all the technical details, it's in the appendix of all the different things that are responsible for changing that. A lot of it having to do with things that are going on right here in North America. The retreat of the ice sheets, for example, changed about 800,000 years ago.
Okay. That you are like that
That's the
head
most
of yours.
complicated thing that's in the book.
Okay, and it gets easier from there. So there's something for all of us. That I just marvel at all of our scholars, that you've probably forgotten more than I will ever know in my entire life, and it's just impressive that I can pull up questions like this and you just have these answers. But I'm going to move on to Michael. And it is reported, Michael says, it is reported that a very large hole opened up in the ozone layer over the Arctic Circle. Is it because of man-made pollution? If it is, what would be the best way to deal with it? NASA reported in 2019 that the warmer temperatures had caused the hole to greatly reduce in size. How do you read this? It seems contradictory.
Yeah, this got a lot of attention in the social media, especially in the last 60 days. How we've got this widening hole in the Arctic. Uh, it counterbalances the fact that the Antarctic hole has gotten smaller. About 40 years ago, the nations of the world said we're going to have to stop using certain freons because they're making the Antarctic hole bigger. Well, the Antarctic hole has gotten a lot smaller, but in the last 2 years, the Arctic hole has gotten bigger. But most scientists feel that's a temporary phenomenon. And also, there's a move, and I mentioned this in the book, that we ruled against the use of CFCs for refrigerants some 30 years ago. There's now a move to eliminate the use of HFC refrigerants because they're about 50% as damaging on the ozone hole as the CFCs. And I think that ban is going to go into effect for virtually all the nations of the world this year in 2020. And so hopefully that will continue the shrinking of the Antarctic ozone hole and likewise the Arctic ozone hole. But yeah, certain climate factors are believed to be responsible for why we had this temporary opening of the Arctic ozone hole. But yeah, keep in mind the Antarctic hole has gotten a lot smaller.
What are your thoughts? And if I missed it, forgive me. What are your thoughts on why the hole has reduced in size?
Well, it's reduced in size because we've stopped using these refrigerant chemicals. I mean, they go up into the atmosphere, and incidentally, they're extremely efficient greenhouse gases. Now, we don't put that many into the atmosphere, but they're literally thousands of times more efficient in trapping heat from the sun than, say, carbon dioxide is. And so it's not only helping to shrink the ozone holes, it's also having a major effect on, preventing the rise of the surface temperature of the Earth. But as I mentioned in the book, they're now going to take care of HFCs as well. But I think what we now know is that the good news is there are refrigerants that we can use that are neither CFCs or HFCs that are efficient. So this isn't necessarily a lose-lose. And I think that's important because there are underground factories. We know they exist in India, they probably exist in China, that are still producing black market CFCs. So we can provide them with an economic incentive, then we won't have to worry about this black market industry going on.
Yeah, we're back to we need to work together as
Look for
cooperate.
a win-win. That's how you eliminate people that are doing things in the black market economy.
There you go. So I know in our conversation previously, you had talked about the global warming and then that leading to an ice age. And so the next question comes from Kirby Hansen. And Kirby asks, when do you expect we will see the next downward effects of the current ice age cycle?
Well, we can get some idea about that by looking at previous ice age cycles. And what we notice is every time the global mean temperature has jumped up to about 2 to 3 degrees centigrade above where it is now, we see the planet plummet very quickly into an ice age. And I got a chapter in the book explaining why that happens. That when you raise the global mean temperature, one of the effects is you melt the polar ice cap. And when you got ice over the Arctic Ocean, it reflects sunlight with about 60% efficiency. But when you melt that ice and you got open Arctic Ocean liquid water, it reflects sunlight with only 6% efficiency, which means the Arctic Ocean, free of ice, absorbs a lot of heat from the sun. And when it absorbs a lot of heat from the sun, it makes a lot of water vapor. And that water vapor falls on Siberia and Canada as snow. One reason we don't have an ice age right now is that Siberia and Canada are deserts. They only get about 10 inches of precipitation per year. And so, yes, snow falls there in the winter, but it's sufficiently low that it melts in the summer and you don't get an accumulation of ice. But if you melt the polar ice cap, it wouldn't surprise me that instead of 10 inches of precipitation on northern Canada and Siberia, you get 20 inches. And if you get 20 inches, you're going to get snow accumulating and transforming into ice quite rapidly. And within centuries, you could have 1,000 feet of ice covering all of Canada and Siberia. And of course, that reflects sunlight with 60% efficiency, which has an impact on cooling the entire planet and keeping the planet in ice age for another 90,000 years, where the global mean temperature is jumping up and down by 15 degrees centigrade. So that's not a good thing for human global civilization. We'll be wise to prevent that from happening. And I think the good news is in the last couple of years, we've seen no growth in the melting away of the summer ice cap, of the Arctic summer ice cap. So if we can sustain that, that would be a good thing to do. But that explains why you get rapid global cooling after a period of significant global warming.
So many thoughts. I'm also watching all the questions come in. So the short answer to what you said is, like, if you were to put, you sound like you said like a couple thousand years that we would be actually seeing that, or I understood the whole process, but if we were looking at now, when would we be seeing that?
Well, see, a lot of people think, well, we got this much global warming, it's going to fall as rain on Canada and Siberia instead of as snow, and because we're going to be warming up both Canada and Siberia. But I'm from Canada, and that part of the world, the winter temperature is about 70 below, and raising the temperature to 60 below is not going to give you rain. You're still going to get snow. And so the real problem is when you melt that ice cap, you got open ocean Arctic water that can now evaporate and make snow. And if you make too much snow, it's going to accumulate. And you say, how rapidly? Well, it depends. If you've got 30 inches equivalent snow, it's going to accumulate much more rapidly. What we did notice in the last ice age cycle is that when the ice begins to accumulate, you're only looking at about 1,000 or 2,000 years before you got thousands of feet of ice covering all of Canada and most of Siberia. And keep this in mind. We're living here in Southern California. The last ice age, the ice came all the way down into Southern California. So it's not just Canada is going to be impacted. Large chunks of the United States will be impacted as well.
Wow. Wow. I can't
Well,
even
that's where
picture that.
Yosemite Valley came from, right?
Oh, okay. We learn something new every day. I have a question from Ron Birdie, and Ron asked the question, if climate sensitivity is asymptotic.
Asymptotic, yeah.
Yeah, maybe you can tell me what I just said. Haven't we already done most of the damage we'll ever do?
Well, it is true that if we continue on the path that we're going, just basically ignore what's happening and continue living the way we're living, we're going to see the temperature go up by another degree centigrade within the next 70 years, because we saw what happened in the past 70 years. And, if that happens, we're going to be close to melting the polar ice cap and bringing on global cooling. I think it will certainly happen if we raise the global mean temperature by 2.5 degrees centigrade. Uh, so yeah, if we just do, keep going like we're going and don't make any changes, those are the consequences we'll face. However, if we look at this and say, wow, in just 70 years, we've erased 8,700 years of global cooling, we need to pay attention to this. And let's look for solutions where we can stop this rise of global mean temperature while at the same time boosting the world economy. I mean, one thing I suggest in the book, for example, is we really need to pursue thorium nuclear reactors. We've been trying to make energy with uranium reactors, but thorium reactors are much safer and they're much more economic. And we actually had them back in 1969 on a very small scale. And, as part of the physics community, I've been aware that we focused 70 years of research and billions of dollars on trying to find some way to come up with fusion energy, the kind of energy you see coming out of the sun. And if we could pull that off, it would produce for us all the energy we want. But there are huge technological hurdles to overcome. I believe those hurdles are minuscule when you look at thorium. They're there, but I think they can be overcome for a lot less money. And, there's so much thorium in the crust of the Earth. Our planet Earth has 630 times as much thorium as what we'd expect in any other rocky planet. So we've been blessed with all this thorium. And one question that comes to me is, if we have this incredible immensity of thorium in the crust of the Earth, maybe it's there for a reason. And, the United States, for example, has got enough thorium that it could produce all the energy we need, 100% of the energy we need at the level we're using it today for several thousand years. And there's a potential we could produce it for a fraction of the cost of what we're paying now for energy. So that, again, is another example that we could significantly reduce the use of these fossil fuels, significantly reduce the amount of greenhouse gases we're putting in the atmosphere, and actually everybody having a cheaper form of energy than we have right now. So again, a win-win solution.
And you unpack this a little bit more and dig in a little bit more on weather and climate change.
That's the whole reason why I wrote the book.
All right, good. All right. We in our conversation prior as well, we talked about the Amazon forest, the impact on it, and your kind of advice about not cutting down all the trees, but
cut them down the right way.
cut them down the right way.
That you make money, and cut them down in a way where you actually stabilize the climate. Again,
Okay.
win-win. And also
Okay.
it'd be a win-win for the life that lives in the Amazon. So, if you selectively lumber the trees, cutting down the older trees of different species and replanting them with trees that grow faster, the life that lives in the Amazon would benefit. And we'd still have all the medicines that we can pull out of the Amazon. The Amazon is the most biologically diverse place on the planet. It's to our economic benefit to sustain that diversity. But also, I think we can appeal to the people living in the Amazon. This is a way that will enhance your economic well-being long term.
Now we have you've been asking a question about that, and I'm curious too. Um, as soon as I was reading it, there it disappeared. All right, um, kind of like the dust bowl that we had, and the impact of using the same ground over and over and over and over again and it depleting it. You've been as asking the question, can the composition of soil in Amazon change after continuous lumbering and replanting of trees? It sounds like kind of what you're proposing. Would that eventually deplete the soil?
Well, the Amazon soil is well suited for a jungle environment, where it's mainly a jungle forest. It's not well suited for conversion to pasture lands. You convert it to pasture lands and try to grow grasses there, and have cattle grazing on those grasses, you'll deplete the soil probably within 20 years. Yes, you can make good money for a decade, but once you see the depletion of the soil, you're going to have an economic drop off. Whereas we already know we can sustain the soil nutrients if we maintain it as a jungle forest. And so it's to our benefit to keep it as a jungle forest, but to realize there's ways that we can use that jungle forest to provide a steady economic income that wouldn't be threatened by the soil depletion. That's my concern about the ranchers there. Yes, they can make good money for 2 or 3 years, but there's a day of reckoning coming. Whereas if they were to go to responsible lumbering, that can be sustained long term, and it does help to stabilize the climate.
Um, my next question here, I'm going to read the question from Dave, and then I kind of want to expound on a little bit if you give me a second. Dave asks, some quote unquote experts say global warming is man-made, and other experts say it's from natural causes. How do intelligent but non-expert folks discern the truth? And this was one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, that you have well-meaning people on both sides of the argument, and I truly believe that people aren't just making things up. Each side has their evidence per se, and how are we to sort this through? How are we supposed to discern and find information?
Yeah, this was controversial, say a decade ago. And I think what's helpful now is we got much better and more reliable data than we had a decade ago. And basically, what I talk about in the book is how starting 8,700 years ago, the natural cycles began to cool the planet. So, for example, the tilt of the Earth's rotation axis began to change from 24.5 degrees, and it's now moving down to 22.1. We're at 23.5 right now. So, we're in a cooling phase in terms of the tilt of rotation axis. We're also in a cooling phase in terms of the shape of the Earth's orbit about the sun. So the natural cycles are cooling the planet. But what happened 8,700 years ago, with the launch of human civilization, the Neolithic Revolution, human activity began to warm the planet. We domesticated cows, for example. We began to grow rice. And there's a number of other things we did that began to gradually warm the planet. And amazingly, for 8,700 years, human activity was warming the planet at exactly the rate the natural cycles were cooling it. And so they counterbalance one another. Here we had these natural cycles that normally would have rapidly cooled the planet, but you had human activity and civilization growth that began to warm the planet, and the two were in balance, in such great balance that for 8,700 years, the global mean temperature very steadily and linearly declined by only 1 degree centigrade. Now human activity is marching at such a huge pace that we've warmed the planet by 1 degree in just 70 years. So there's two factors going on. There's the natural cycles cooling the planet, human activity is warming it, and there are ways that we can do to sustain that perfect balance that we've seen up until the year 1950.
So it sounds like you're saying it's both and, that it is natural and man-made.
Well, it's more complicated than that because some of the human activity cools the planet. Other human activities warm it. Likewise with the natural cycles. Some of them work to cool the planet, some of them work to warm the planet. What I talk about in the book is let's average out all the natural phenomena, and if we average it all out, it's been consistently cooling the planet, very consistently and linearly cooling the planet. And likewise, if you average out all the human activities, they've been consistently and linearly warming the planet. And they've been in terrific balance with one another, except for the past 70 years.
It sounds like, and I'm honest to goodness, I'm not trying to push your book, um, but it sounds like for those of us who want a starting point that has really kind of measured everything. And like you said, looking far back into the climate history of this earth and what's happening now. What are our contributions? That it sounds like a good starting point is weathering climate change. And am I correct?
Well, in the sense that it will help you when this subject comes up, and you and I both know it comes up all the time. I mean, you can be on a bus or in a subway station and it comes up. So it's there. But I think what will help readers is the fact that I take an interdisciplinary approach, is that, and just being able to share with people. I mean, are you aware of what's happening with the physics of the sun? And are you aware of what's going on as the Earth goes around the orbit of the sun? So just bringing in all these other factors and helping people realize this is way more complicated than I ever thought. And the more we learn, the more complicated it gets, which should humble us in saying, we really need to be circumspect about this. At the same time, we need to be urgent. We don't have the luxury of studying this for another 50 years.
Hmm.
And I agree. I think we know enough already, thanks to the fact that people in many different scientific disciplines are finally talking to one another, working one another. It amazes me, for example, when I read the astrophysical literature, how much of it is actually focusing on Earth climate change. I mean, the astronomers are all getting involved, mathematicians are getting involved. And to me, that's really a thrill because as a scientist, I'm concerned about over specialization, where people only do research in a narrow subdiscipline, and especially something like climate change, it's way too complex to be solved by just scientists in one narrow subdiscipline. We need to start talking to one another. And I'm encouraged that that's actually happening.
Wonderful, wonderful. That is encouraging. That gentleman I told you about on the plane that was really, really frightened by climate change. I did mention about the content of your book and that there are things that we can do. There are win-win situations. And honestly, I wish you could have seen his face because he went from very, very scared and he literally sat back and he said, "That gives me hope." And that that I can't tell you what that did for my heart, and that I know that that's your intent as well. And Hugh, we are coming up on an hour, believe it or not. That went so fast, and we still have so many questions. So I'm going to try to get to, if you're okay with it, maybe two more questions, and
Sure.
terrific. And then all of the other questions, as always, we will go ahead and continue our conversation after this feed is over, and we will make that available through our RTB Live Extra podcast. And of course, if you just subscribe to Reasons to Believe wherever you get your podcast from, then you can get that. And I think my understanding is that that should be out. The continuation of this and getting through these questions should be out this coming Saturday. So I will jump into the next question from Paul Kronberg. Is CO2 the dominant variable determining global temperature?
It's one of many greenhouse gases, and that's something I make a point about in the book, is that you're going to get into trouble if you focus on just one greenhouse gas. Carbon dioxide is a significant greenhouse gas. Incidentally, the most significant one of all is water vapor, but water vapor is relatively constant in the atmosphere, whereas carbon dioxide is increasing. And that's gotten all the attention, but we need to also pay attention to methane. We need to pay attention to nitrous oxides. We need to be paying attention to the refrigerants we're putting in the atmosphere. And so what you see in the book is we actually look at all the greenhouse gases in an integrated way, because you could make the mistake of unintended consequences, where you reduce the carbon dioxide going to the atmosphere, but you wind up enhancing the methane and the nitrous oxides going to the atmosphere. In particular, I talk about how there's new ways that we could raise rice, but you got to be careful because rice not only pumps carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it also pumps methane and nitrous oxides. So we need to look at all the greenhouse gases and make sure that what we're doing doesn't turn out to be counterproductive. There's a whole chapter on unintended consequences. And it's always good in any complex issue like this that when you look at solutions, say, what are the potential consequences? and I'm going to get myself into more trouble than I bargained for.
Oh, okay, rice pumping methane into the atmosphere. I thought that was only cows. I had no idea.
Well, I mean, when you harvest the rice, it's usually we do it by flooding the fields, and then the rice stalks begin to rot, and that puts methane into the atmosphere.
Huh. That is that is really interesting. Um,
You do it the wrong way, you wind up putting a lot of nitrous oxides in the atmosphere.
okay, nitrous oxide's bad. That's um, I have a question here, and it says, "Is there any evidence that the Earth's poles are slowly shifting?"
While there is evidence that the Earth's magnetic poles are shifting, the Earth's rotation axis shifts a little bit by very, very tiny amounts. So I'm not worried about any change in the tilt of our rotation axis, but certainly we do see significant movement in the magnetic poles that are taking place. And that's going to shift where we're going to be seeing the aurora borealis. I do mention that shift, however, in the context of preparing for solar flares. If we get another solar flare like we had in 1859, it could seriously impact the power grids around the world. And where you got the magnetic pole is a factor on how you need to prepare for that. And there's been especially significant movement in the last 10 years of the magnetic pole. By the way, one of the good factors is your compass now points more accurately to the rotation axis than it did when you were a child. So your compass is better.
Leave it to Hugh. The glass is half full. There's always a silver lining. um, Hugh, we have a question here. I think I'm going to handle this one more question, and then I'll hand it off to you. Anything else that you want to share with us? But this one comes from Dixon, and really, really good. How much is climate change, and then parenthetically, tornadoes, hurricanes, flooding, is attributed to the fall? And can man really lessen the effects?
Well, I wouldn't blame tornadoes or hurricanes or wildfires or solar flares or pandemics on the fall. I mean, it tells us in the Bible in 7 different places that the laws of physics don't change over the history of the universe. And we do have tornadoes and earthquakes and hurricanes and wildfires because of the fact we live in a universe with gravity and thermodynamics, electromagnetism, and a strong and weak nuclear force. And I've written about this fairly extensively in a previous book, More Than a Theory, making the point that we need earthquakes and tornadoes and hurricanes. They actually serve very good purposes. And and we also note that they're optimized. We don't have too many earthquakes. We don't have too few earthquakes. They're at the optimal level. And everything we refer to as a natural disaster, we see that they are optimized. On the other hand, we have Jesus saying to us in the Gospels, don't build your house on the sand. Knowing that you live in a place where there are hurricanes coming in from the Atlantic, it's probably not a good idea to move to the east coast of Florida and have a what they call those manufactured homes or on a beach. I mean, that's a good example of building a flimsy domicile in a place where you got the greatest danger from being struck by a hurricane. And incidentally, the Native Americans refused to live on the coast of Florida because they knew about these hurricanes. But we want to be close to the beach. And what do? We send our elderly citizens to retire there, and they're the ones that are most at risk. So that's an example where we need to be a little bit wise about the fact that these things happen and to properly prepare. I mean, we're here in California, and we got building codes to try to protect us from earthquakes. But what's interesting, many parts of the United States don't have those building codes, and they're actually at higher risk from earthquake damage than those of us here in California. So simply being wise about this, but appreciate these things have been optimized. And I think that's a point I'm trying to make in the book. We see extreme optimization in the context of this last 9,500 years. And that should just blow us away, saying, wow, I can't believe that God did all this just for us. And why did he do that?
Hmm, that's good. That, and again, we have that why question. That is a good contemplative, just ponder on that question. Okay, so I wish you could see, Hugh, all the stuff that's going on behind the scenes here, the stuff that I'm seeing. Um, Apparently our friends are hanging in tight on this. The questions are still coming. And so they've asked if I can take maybe one or two more. I know I said that a while back, but are you okay with that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's
Take
go for it.
all right. Again, there are so many, and they're great questions. And I promise, whatever we don't do today, that we will get to it. It will be on RTB Live Extra on the podcast. Again, you can subscribe to Reasons to Believe wherever you get your podcasts, and hear that this coming Saturday. Everything that we weren't able to get to today. So we have a question from Lakina. And Lakina asks, is it possible that even without human interference, climate change or global warming could still happen?
Yes, I mean, that's a very good point. No matter what we do, another ice age is coming. So we have the option of delaying the onset of the next ice age. We don't have the option of preventing it. But from my perspective of reading the Bible, I think we can fulfill the purpose for why God put us here on earth in the time that we got remaining in terms of when this inevitable thing will take place. So it's our choice whether we bring on the next ice age in 100 years or bring it on in 1500 years. I'm all for pushing it back 1500 years. And that will give us plenty of time as a human species to fulfill the purpose for why God put us here on planet Earth. But the idea that we can sustain this forever, incidentally, I have a chapter in the book saying this is not the only thing that's going to doom us. There's all kinds of things that tell us our time here within the universe is temporary. After all, the universe is expanding. If you let it continue expanding at an accelerating rate, there reaches a point where you get the big rip, where protons are no longer stable. And if protons get ripped apart, human existence is impossible. That's not going to happen for many hundreds of billions of years. But for example, the sun's getting brighter. Eventually, the sun will get so bright it's not going to be possible for us to sustain photosynthesis on the face of the earth. That's going to cripple our food supply. That's going to happen in just a few million years. But then I back it all the way up to things that are going to happen in only thousands of years, in only hundreds of years. Just making the point that God intended all along that our time here on planet Earth would be temporary, it would be brief. But the good news in all of that is we only have to be exposed to the decay of this universe for a brief period of time. God has promised that when we fulfill the purpose for which He put us here on planet Earth, He's going to take us to a brand new realm where there's no decay, no death, no suffering, no evil, completely different physics. But that won't happen until we first fulfill the purpose for which He created us. And He's given us all the resources and all the time that we need to do that.
Um, Hugh, I think I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to you, but we'll tackle these other questions again on the podcast. But you have mentioned purpose a number of times. You've alluded to it in the conversation, and that God designed this planet for a purpose, and that we will be on this planet long enough to fulfill our purpose. And again, we have people of faith and people that don't hold to a particular faith, and maybe some that are just curious. Um, what is this purpose that you keep alluding to?
Well, it's something I dig into in some detail and why the universe is the way it is. Basically, when you look at the space time dimensions and the laws of physics, what jumps out is that they're fine tuned for God to eradicate evil rapidly and efficiently. And we human beings are center stage as one of God's tools to bring about this eradication of evil and suffering, not just for our benefit, but for the benefit of the angelic realm as well. And so, and that tells, I mean, when you read what the Bible says about the new creation, the physics is radically different. The dimensions are radically different. Why? Because there's a realm in which evil no longer can exist. And so we're here as a tool in God's hand to see the eradication of evil and suffering. I mean, consider it's thermodynamics that ensures that the more sin you commit, the more pain you're going to experience, the more time you're going to waste, and the harder you're going to have to work. And if you're like me, Sia, you don't enjoy gratuitous work, gratuitous pain, or wasted time. And so, as I share with my sons when I was raising them, if I don't discipline you, the laws of physics will.
Mm.
And so, the laws of physics and the space time dimensions are designed to point us away from our selfishness, our tendency towards sin and evil, towards a virtuous life, and to discovering we can't do it without the help of the Creator. But if we go to the Creator, He has promised, if you come to me, I'll give you what you can't do for yourself. And so this is the whole message of the Christian faith, what separates Christianity from all the other religions of the world. And yes, He designed this earth in such a way that that message could be efficiently taken to billions of human beings, not in millions of years, but in just hundreds of years. And so the fact that we've only got a maximum of 1,500 years left, that's more than enough time to bring about this goal that God has to use the universe, the earth, and humanity in such a way that billions of us can come into a relationship with Him where we can be permanently delivered from the consequences of evil and suffering. And it's all done through the hands of the Creator of the universe. The Creator of the universe came here 2,000 years ago and made a trade. He sacrificed Himself on the cross, paid for the offense that all of us have committed against God and against one another, and said, I'm willing to trade my moral perfection for your moral imperfection and have my Holy Spirit come into you in such a way that you can be step by step delivered from this tendency towards sin and evil and on a path of virtue to where you become morally perfect. That will happen. And that's the message of Christianity. And what is amazing to me, God gave us all the resources financially, technologically, in terms of the population we need to get that job done relatively quickly. In fact, what amazes me is I think we could pull this off in decades. It doesn't necessarily take hundreds of years.
Thank you so much, Hugh. And I guess I would just ask you to fill us in if people have enjoyed this. And like I said, you have so much knowledge and so much to access. Like, how can they follow you? How can they learn more? Maybe how can they get a hold of this book? And can you let us know what's happening next week?
Yeah, I can do all of that. And I'm going to do something corny here and just thank all my relatives for tuning in. I've never been able to get them to watch me like this. So thank all of you for tuning in, including my little nephew, Jake, there. So this is great. But yeah, all of the scholars at Reasons to Believe maintain a Facebook and Twitter page. And we predominantly use that to keep you abreast of the latest new scientific evidence for the Christian faith. But we also take questions. So this is not the only opportunity that people have to post questions towards us. And we do our best to keep up with all the questions we get on Facebook and Twitter. So people can take advantage of that. Next week, Ken Samples will come in with a RTBLive segment just like this. And his subject is going to be 5 ways historic Christianity is reasonable. So you don't want to miss that. And as we mentioned at the beginning, you can get free chapters of the books that all the scholars have written at Reasons to Believe just by going to reasons.org/their last name. So in my case, it's reasons.org/Ross. We're not yet giving away a free chapter of Weathering Climate Change because we're offering you something better. You can go to our website and for a gift of any amount, we will send you a copy, a gift of any amount to Reasons to Believe. And you can do that by going to give.reasons.org. We will send you a copy of Weathering Climate Change. And if your question wasn't answered during this event, I know we got a ton of questions we haven't gotten to. You can tune in to RTB Live Extra. That's a podcast that we have on Saturdays where we continue the conversation. And that's where we'll answer the rest of the questions that have been backlogged onto this segment on climate change. And that will be released this Saturday on April 18th.
All right, Hugh, thank you so much. It was great having this conversation with you. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.